Hey, what's up guys? It's Kyle from RR Buildings and I'm coming back at you with another Tools Day. And we're gonna go a little bit unique this time. I'm gonna show you guys some how-to tips and tricks. And if you wanna know what I'm holding here and how I made it, let's get into it. All right guys, so today we are gonna talk about my brake. And what I've got is a Tapco Maxx XL 12'6" metal bending brake. And I've used this now, I've had it for about 10 years. I got super lucky, I bought it at an auction. I got it for like $1,100. This is about a $4,000 brake. And I don't use it all the time. I used to use it a lot more back in my remodeling residential days, but it comes in super handy when you're out on the job and you've got a custom detail that you need to bend. So there's really not a ton that we're gonna talk about here. I'll show you some of the specs. I'll show you how a brake works. And then after that, we'll go ahead and I'll show you 5 easy bends that I've learned and use quite regularly on the job site. All right, so we really don't have a ton of specs to go over with the brake. It's a 12'6" brake, like I told you before, which means I can put 12'6" worth of material in here. I never do that because if you get that long, it just doesn't do very good at the very ends, I found. So I usually try to stay 12 foot or less. It does have about a 19-inch throat, which means you can stick about 19 inches of flat stock in there and bend up still. And I mean, other than that, you've got a handle, and this is what's going to open your brake so that you can put your material inside, and then you're going to use it to clamp it down. Once your material is locked in place, and I guess I could be actually doing this with a piece of material, you're going to use these handles down here, and these are all movable. So if you don't like it here, if you want it out here where you got more material, or down here, you can move those around. There's actually a couple more that get stored in the brake, so that's kind of a nice feature, so that if you're transporting it, you know, you got these pins, and I haven't taken them off forever, so I just leave them in there. But you can remove them, and they do stick in the brake frame itself. So the other thing that I've got on here are these, this accessory. It's a Just Bend It brake accessory. And what's nice is it just has these magnetic ends and they stick right on the bar. So you can just move them wherever you're doing your material. And once you have them set up and zeroed in, they work really well for not having to bring your tape measure out every time, mark your material. You just basically put it to where the measurement is that you want it and lock it down, and you're good to go. So that's pretty cool accessory, and takes about 15 minutes maybe to put on. So I'll go ahead and throw the links down below. I'm sure they would appreciate it, and I think you will too, because it has saved me a lot of time when bending trims. Other than that, this thing did come with a stand, which is really nice because it's got some wheels, so you can roll it on and out of in and out of the trailer, on and off the job site. The other thing it came with is a slitter. So obviously everybody that has gotten a coil of aluminum, steel, whatever, at 24, 48, whatever it is, inches wide, you don't ever need that wide of a piece, and you got to cut it down. So there's a couple different tips. One would be to go and buy yourself one of these slitters, because it makes like an effortless use of cutting the material. But the other thing is, if you don't want to go spend the money on one of these, I'll show you another trick. In order to cut the aluminum, you're not probably going to use it on steel, but if you're just doing aluminum bending, I'll show you that trick. So before we get into actually bending some of these trim details, I'm going to show you a little trick that someone showed me, and it's super simple, but it does save you a lot of time and effort. And it doesn't really involve this at all, but it does have to do with bending steel or aluminum. All right, right, so here is the trick for you guys, and a lot of you might already know this, but I know there's somebody that was in the position I was when I learned, so I'm gonna show it to you anyway. You get this box of coil stock, and the first thing you gotta do is you gotta pull it out and you gotta cut the first piece to length. Well, now this is 50 foot, so if you pull that out, it is a bear to handle, to roll out, to measure it 12 foot, and then put it back in the box so it doesn't uncoil itself across the job site. So what you do is you're gonna take a knife, don't need it out that far, and you're just gonna cut right down a corner. Make another cut, just give yourself like a 1/4 inch. Just rip that out. Now what you're gonna do, you're gonna spin this. Till you get your material starting to come out. Go ahead and pull it out a little bit. Then you're just gonna duct tape the lid back shut. And now you got your own little dispenser here, and you can just pull your material out as you need it, cut it down, or if you want to just set it on the ground, then you can pull it out, get your cut right across where you're going to want to cut it, so you don't have the whole coil coming out. So hopefully that helps somebody. All right, so that tip is going to be good when you need to cut your material to length, but what about width? So now I've got this 24-inch piece of coil stock, and you can either use this cutoff wheel, which I will show you in a second, but when I was first starting, I didn't have one of these, and this is what somebody showed me. So you're gonna stick the material in your brake. Since I got these sweet little Just Bend It markers, I'm gonna set it at just some random number, 7 inches. You're gonna lock it down, and then you're gonna take your utility knife and you're gonna score it right along your brake. Give it a nice full bend. And voila, now you got your 7-inch piece of material, and that's a pretty cheap way to do it, but it doesn't do it the most perfect way. It gives you a little bit of a lip here on the edge of the metal, and the cutoff wheel does a lot better job, so I'll show you how that works. All right, so now we've got this kind of crummy bend here because we just use our utility knife to make that bend cut, and we're gonna use the cutoff tool now. So what I'm gonna do, once again, I'm just gonna pull it out to a, really doesn't matter. I'm just gonna cut a little bit off. So I'm gonna move it out to 2 inches. Now you might be saying, well, Kyle, you just said you weren't gonna cut off a lot. The way this works is you always have to think about what you want, and you're gonna add 1.5 inches to it. And I do that because the way this cutoff wheel works is it cuts or shears or slits, however you want to say it, right at 1.5 inches from the brake. So you just make sure it's in here, you make sure it's rolling nice and free. And that's it. It puts a nice clean cut every time. So now as you can see, we got this nice clean, it almost looks factory because it's cut just about as nice as factory, and that's gonna give you that nice clean edge every time. It rolls it instead of cutting it, so it's not gonna be as sharp too when you touch it with your fingers. All right, so now those are 2 tips that hopefully help somebody both prepping your material so that you can get the right dimensions for your trims. Now I'm gonna take this piece of scrap that we just cut off, and I'm just gonna show you how this brake actually works. So the first thing you're gonna do is you're gonna put your material in. I always usually try to put a hem in the material, and that's like the most simplest of bends. And what a hem does is it helps clean up an edge, stiffen it, and make it stronger. So I'll show you that, and then I think it'll make a lot of sense. I always just basically put my material right to the edge of this bending piece of rubber, lock it down, and give it a full bend. Now once I've got a full bend, you can see it is not all the way closed, but a hem is all the way closed. So all you're gonna do is you're gonna make sure your brake is closed. You're gonna set it back in here, and then you're gonna close it. And that is what's gonna give you this super nice tight hem, and it's also gonna stiffen the flashing. You see that? You see how it's not so floppy because it's got that bend over on it. So that's like probably the most simplest of things. Anytime you do a flashing that is going to be visible, put a hem in it and it's gonna stiffen it up and it's gonna take away that oil can. Now remember, oil can is when your steel waves and looks really crappy, so you don't want oil can, you wanna prevent it. And anytime you put a bend in flat stock, it's gonna prevent bending that much more. Now the next thing is just a simple 90-degree bend, probably the most common, and the first thing you're gonna wanna do probably is just bend a piece of metal. So we're just gonna do, with the same piece of scrap, we're gonna stick our material in. I'm gonna line it up here on the edge of my bender, brake edge, whatever, I don't know what it's called, sorry. And I'm just gonna basically roll this up till my handles are just about 90 degrees. And I always like to do that because if you go too far, you're never gonna get that bend out. But if you don't like your bend, you can always bring them back up and give it just a little bit more tension. But because I've done this a couple times and I've used this brake, that is how you get a nice 90-degree bend. Not sure if the camera's gonna focus, but look at that. We just bent, like the most simplest of things, a little bit of maybe a drip edge, a simple mini angle, or post trim, fascia, whatever. It's pretty simple. Now, if you were to take this exact same piece, stick it back in the brake, push it in till we get that hem tight to the edge of our brake, and tighten it back up. Ooh, I just about messed up. Sorry, we're gonna go the other way. Talking here on camera has got me flustered. Do the exact same bend. Now we just made a simple piece of tiny J channel that you'll never get your fingers in to put a nail in because there's not a big enough nail flange, but there you go. That is a simple piece of J channel. So believe it or not, we just did two of the most common bends in the first piece of trim, and that was a hem, which I think is very important, and a J channel. Probably the most common piece of trim that anybody uses on a metal building or a vinyl sided house, whatever it is. J channel is so common, and it never hurts to know how to bend it. Even though it's the most simplest, I think it's worth pointing out how to bend it. It's two simple 90 degrees and a hem. So there you go. Let's go ahead and we'll look at another trim. All right, here's another trim, and it's actually even more simple than the J channel. I forgot. So let's do a fascia trim. Now you're gonna do almost the exact same thing to start off, and I usually do this on almost every start, and that is create your hem. Okay, so once we've got our hem, with most fascia, you're gonna be 1.5 inches. So we're gonna use this little guy here. We're gonna set our face of our hem at 1.5 inches. We're gonna do our 90-degree bend up. Then we're gonna take the other end here. Oops. And look at that, you just created a piece of fascia. And so that's just gonna have a nice 1.5" bend. It's gonna cap up underneath your, or over top of your soffit and cover up your fascia, nice and clean. It's got those nice hems. That way it's nice and stiff. You see that? It's not gonna get any of that oil can in between the flat here. So the bigger this area is, the more chance of an oil can. That's why when you look a lot of piece of fascia trims, they've got little beads and little rolls here. And you can buy those the same way that you have that cutoff tool. You can use, you can buy different profile rollers that you just put your material in, and as you roll it across it, it puts little beads and little bends in it. But I don't have any, so I can't show you it. All right, so the next trim I'm gonna show you is a very simple trim. It's a ridge cap trim. And obviously you're not gonna use it on a shingle probably, but if you're doing any metal work and you wanna bend your ridge cap, you're gonna watch and notice that almost every one of these trims, once again, is gonna start with a 3/4 hem. So we're gonna do that. I'm just gonna put my material on the edge. Okay, now the next thing we are going to do is start our bend, and we've got a series of 3/4 bends, so always using the edge of our brake as our tape measure. So I'm not even having to pull out my tape measure. Now when we make these bends, you're gonna wanna make sure you don't go to the 90, but rather a 45 degree. So here we've got the start of our trim, and you can see we've got our 3/4 hem to a 3/4 bend with another 3/4 bend, and this is a 45 to a 45, which is basically keeping our material at 180 degrees overall. All right, now we're gonna do the exact same thing on the other side of our material. All right, so now we've got the same bends on both ends, and you can probably guess what we're gonna do next. Now this is where you want to make sure that you know the dimension of your flat in between all these bends. I've already kind of pre-measured that, a little HGTV secret I learned. I've never even been on HGTV, but I just assume they do a lot of stuff off camera, so you don't have to show it. And then you're going to stick that in your brake. I'm going right to my 6 inches. And this is where whatever you bend this at is determined by the pitch of your roof. So if I don't give it a whole lot of bend, you can see it's going to be a very flat pitched roof. If you don't like the bend, I always say bend a little bit at first, don't over bend it. Stick it back in your brake and get yourself more of a bend. I would say that's more like what I'm gonna do, which is a 412 on most of our buildings, but that's a nice, simple piece of ridge cap. And obviously, if you want to get really decorative, we can add a bunch of other bends. I won't do that right now. Maybe we'll do a cool decorative bend at the end. All right, the last bend I'm gonna do is one that always boggles my mind right away, but once you do it a couple times, it gets a lot easier, and that is an outside corner trim with a built-in J-channel, so that way you can hide that vinyl or whatever that siding is that you're putting up. So this time we are not going to start with that hem. What we're gonna do is we're gonna start with a 3-inch bend. So we're gonna set our piece of material at 3 inches. And we're gonna do a straight 90-degree bend. Okay, then what we are going to do is flip our material over. And once again, we're gonna be pushing it all the way into the stop here of the bender. We're gonna go ahead and overbend it all the way. And this is basically putting a hem bend in the middle of the panel. So that is what the hem bend is gonna look like there. All right, now the next thing we are going to do is we're gonna take this 3-inch piece here and we're gonna stick it in the brake all the way. And do a 90-degree bend. Now what we've got, you can see here, is I don't know if it'll focus there, but we've got a piece of J-channel built in, and now we're gonna do the exact same thing on the other side. And you wanna make sure that you've got the face up, so whatever your finished side of material is, that's what you're gonna keep up on this next bend. 90-degree. Pull it out, flip it over, push it all the way to the stop, do your hem bend, okay, now you're gonna go ahead and you're gonna push that all the way in again on that 3-inch piece. Do a 90-degree bend. And what you have created is basically 2 J's on each side of this material. So we've got a J here and we've got a J here. Now all you have to do is know what the dimension of your flat is, and I don't know what it is, so I'm just gonna pull out my tape measure here. It's about 6 1/4. So I'll go ahead and stick it in here at 3 1/8, both sides, and do a 90-degree bend. So there you go, there is the outside corner, and it's got the built-in J channels on both sides, so when it goes around your corner, your material can tuck right in there nice, and it'll hide the seam on the edge, and it'll look like maybe some wooden lap siding that's, you know, reminiscent of the good old days, as they say, but without having to worry about maintenance, because now you've got a nice piece of painted aluminum. All right, I got another trim for you here, and it's a piece of drip edge, so something that is commonly found on the edge of a roof, and it helps the water drip off the roof and away from your fascia so it doesn't rot it out. Now we're gonna start with another hem, so stick it into your edge, and we're gonna do that full bend. All right, now once you've got your bend, we're gonna go ahead and flip it over, stick it in to the edge again, that 3/4 mark, and just put a slight bend on it. Okay? Now we're gonna pull that out to, let's just go ahead and go about 2 inches. And here we're gonna go 90 degrees. And it's okay if you go a little bit over 90 because most roofs are not flat. So we're just gonna overbend that just slightly, pull that out. Now you're gonna flip it over and stick, oops, gotta move that. Flip it over and stick it all the way in as tight as you can go. And here you're gonna do your hem bend again. Pull it out. Finish the hem, and voila, there you go. Now you've got your piece of drip edge. This is gonna go up on the roof, and this is gonna cover, this is gonna go up on the roof right here, and this is gonna cover your fascia, so when water comes out over it, it's gonna drip right off. All right, now let's go ahead and do a bend that really I've never even done before, but that is what is awesome about having a break, is that you can play with the metal and see what you can develop. And I wanted to show you how to do a slight radius. So if you don't want all those straight bends, but maybe when you look up onto your house trim, you want to make it look like it's bent in a radius, I'll show you how to do that. So this is going to simulate, like, let's say a piece of crown molding up on your fascia. So first we're going to start with our hem. All right, and once we've got our hem, we're gonna give ourselves our 1.5 inch bend down at the eave, and that's what's gonna bend over the bottom and cover your soffit. Typically that's 1.5 inches. I'm gonna go 1.25 inches on this just to conserve some material. All right, so now we've got this piece of trim, and really it's like that piece of fascia I showed you earlier. It's got the bend that'll go up underneath the soffit, and then this long piece is gonna go on the fascia. Well, what if you want to make this look kind of decorative? Well, this is how you do it, and this is how you can kind of make just a slight radius. So I'm just going to kind of do a starting point 1.5 inch, 90-degree bend. And then I'm going to flip it over and do another 90-degree bend at the 3/4 stopping point. Notice that we use that edge of our brake all the time because it's always going to give you that 3/4 inch bend. Okay, so now we've got this kind of a profile forming here, and I want to start making a bend. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stick it all the way in, and I'm just going to give it a slight bend, just creasing the metal. And then I'm going to pull it out, and I'm going to find a point on my Just Bend accessory here and use that as a reference point to basically just pull it out of my brake a little bit at a time, but using that reference point to know that I'm parallel to the brake. And I'm just gonna kind of keep doing that little bend, kind of moving it out about 1/4 inch at a time. And I'm going to keep doing this right up until my material starts going perpendicular. You'll see what I mean. What you can see I've got is this is going to cap my soffit down here, and I'm just kind of bending, and I'm doing this nice radius. Now what I'm going to want to do is I'm going to go ahead and take this bend. Make sure I'm running parallel. Now obviously I've never done this bend, but I think you can get the idea. You can do just about anything. You can make it look however you want. If I had more material, I would bend this up again and tuck it up underneath of that nice piece of drip edge that I just made myself. So there you go, guys. I don't know that I would ever call myself a metal master bender, but I do love playing around on the brake, making my own trims and just playing with it. And, you know, using it to replicate some of those things on site is almost priceless, because there's nothing worse than ordering custom trims and having to wait for them forever. Now, if you got any questions about this, if you got any, you know, I guess concerns about what I did show you, drop them down below in the comments. I'd love to hear them, because hopefully you can help me, maybe direct me towards another resource that shows how to bend a lot of trims. When I was contemplating doing this video, I did look out there on YouTube and on the internet to see what else other people were doing, and there's not a lot out there. So I would love to hear from you guys, maybe some of those other intricate bends that you do, so that I can learn how to do them. So thanks a lot for tuning in, and I appreciate your support, and we'll catch you on the next Toolsday.